Hi all, a very good morning. So 2 minutes, we'll quickly start off the session. So in the part of today's topic, we are going to discuss about the last part of our EC2, that is about AWS Lambda, and then we'll quickly make a navigation towards the next services of about networking and the databases. However, we have one more topic remaining in this specific section of EC2, that is about application load balancer, which we are going to check out once we complete the Route 53 as a part of networking and content delivery. So quickly open up the slides. So if you remember, in the part of our introduction course, we learned about some things called as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, right? So those are three terms, but there is something that is coming ahead in the next part of our future, that is about function as a service. Now, when we talk about the infrastructure as a service, we just, as an architect, I need to decide what are all the components that I'm going to make use in order to develop a software, whether it is in terms of database, whether it is in terms of hosting a application. Everything is being decided by architect on what kind of operating system it is going to be, what is the size of the system, and how am I going to connect to both of them. Everything is being decided in IaaS. When we talk about the platform as a service, the platform is ready for you, whether it is a Java or whether it is a Linux. The database, everything is kept ready. Just that as a developer, I start developing the application. Now, when the software as a service comes across, the softwares are ready. I can straight away make use of the softwares in order to make the application feasibility. Now, finally, there is something next that is coming up, that is a function as a service. Now, what happens in the function as a service? I don't need to even build a software. I just need to build one function. That's it. So this is all about the function as a service. I'm going to build across a function. I'm least bothered where this function is going to get executed, whether it's going to get executed on a Linux machine, whether it's going to executed on a Windows machine, or whether it's going to get executed on some other server. We are not bothered about it. So as a part of AWS Lambda as a service, I'm going to write the function. The function can be in any language. It can be in Python, it can be in C Sharp, it can be in Java, or it can be in C Sharp, or it can be in a Node.js. So these are the four languages that currently the Lambda is going to support, which can be used across. So what is Lambda? Lambda is basically a compute service where you can upload your code and create a function. AWS Lambda takes care of provisioning and managing the servers that is used to run the code. You don't have to worry about the operating system, patching, scaling, etc. You can use Lambda in the following ways. So as I just said, it is something called as function as a service, and I never worry about what is the kind of operating system where this function is going to run. It can run on any available operating system behind the scene. All I need to do is just write my function, and function can be in any of the four languages that I described, and we just need to define two parameters. One is the language in which I'm going to write the function, and the second is the amount of memory that is required to execute this function. So those are the two parameters that we need to define, and rest of the things, rest of the things will be taken care by the Lambda. So I don't have to worry about the patches to be applied to operating system, the scaling of servers or anything as such. So there are two ways in which I'll be able to use this Lambda. One is event driven compute service, and the second is just a compute service. So what happens in the event driven compute service? So event driven compute service is like whenever the specific event is triggered, only then I'm going to run this Lambda function. Now the event can be anything. Let's take example of S3 bucket. So I have S3 bucket in Mumbai region where people actually come down and upload the images. So I want to ensure that whenever a new image comes into my S3 bucket, automatically that should be picked up and processed in order to put a watermark, or we can call it something like a trademark of my company, saying that this is now an authorized property of my specific company. Right? So that is the kind of function I would like to do. So whenever the new image gets uploaded to my S3 bucket, I would like to ensure that there is a watermark or the trademark that actually gets onto the photo. So how do we do it? What I'm going to do is I'm going to write a function in the Lambda, and whenever there is a new object getting uploaded to the S3, I'm going to trigger that Lambda function, and I will ensure that automatically it is going to be picked up and the trademark is being written across it. Let me show you the example if I have in. So it would be something like this. The users are trying to upload the image to my S3 bucket, and I'm going to trigger this Lambda function, which is going to pick up the image, and then it is going to put this copyright like this. So this is the watermark that I would like to put across on the image and store it back in the S3 bucket. So in this case, the event is whenever the users are actually putting across the image onto the S3 bucket, I need to put this watermark. So what I'm trying to do is trying to use a Lambda function in this case. So Lambda function is going to determine that whenever there is a new image. So if you remember one more point from the S3, I'll just quickly navigate to the S3 section. The properties of bucket had something called as event, and then in those events we were specifically able to pick up this one. Yeah, so let me open up one of the. So in this properties here, if you remember, this is a place where we have events. So if I go ahead and click on the events and click on add notification, these are the events. Put means basically it's going to help me in putting a new object. Copy means if someone is trying to copy the existing object, if someone is trying to delete the object, right? So I have got various events, and here whenever someone is putting across a new object, I'm going to run the Lambda function or trigger it from here, right? So this is basically event driven compute service. So which is going to specifically do this kind of example where I'm going to pick up an image from S3 bucket, trigger a Lambda function, and this is going to create a watermark like this, and again store it back onto the S3 bucket. Now there's another way that we can use the Lambda, that is about just a compute service to run your code in response to HTTP request using the API gateway or the API calls made using the software development kits. Now if you want to really render a complete website, you can actually do with the Lambda, that is called as a serverless computing environment. Because we are not dependent on any server, whether it is a Linux or a Windows, I'm not dependent on it. I can straight away use the API gateway to create an endpoint, and whenever a request is going to hit on my endpoint, like let's say my endpoint is going to be flipkart.com or amazon.in. So whenever the users are going to hit amazon.in, specifically at that point of time, the API is being hit across from the end user, and that API is going to run my Lambda function to render the web page using the software development kits. So this is the example here. So how the serverless architecture actually works across. So users may actually hit the request from either a mobile device, tablets, or computers or laptop. And in here across, I have API gateway, and the API gateway is now talking to the Lambda function. So whenever the user is going to make a request, it is actually going to send a request to this endpoint, that is API gateway, and the API gateway is in turn going to trigger a Lambda function, and this Lambda function is going to render the actual web page, which will be displayed to the computer. API gateway is like API is application programming interface. Now let me give you an example. Now, when we were trying to work out on the EC2 section, right, or when we were trying to work in the S3 itself, right? So if I go ahead and click on this object URL, right? So if I talk about this specific object, so this URL, right? So how it is being built. So this is a ready URL in order to access this object directly, right? Similarly, we can create an endpoint in order to access some services. So let's say if I have spinned up a database and I want people to directly use the database with a limited access, which is being defined already. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to expose this kind of link where people can directly use it to access the database, and then they'll be able to retrieve the information. So I'm going to expose my application in order to be accessible for the end users with the help of this URL, which is actually called as API endpoint. Now, the beauty of the API is I don't have to help make the users do some configurations. If you remember earlier, if someone really wanted to connect to my database, they need to have some drivers like JDBC or ODBC drivers, and then they will be able to get connect to my database, right? So, or even if I had to open this specific index.html web point, I need to have some drivers which are related to the S3, because I'm trying to use the S3 services of Amazon. So sometimes, before, this is not about today, but if we talk about 10 years before, when we had to use any of these softwares, like if I have got an image that is put across on S3 bucket, let's say, so S3, something like S3 would have a software that needs to be configured in your system, and only then you'll be able to open up that image from there, right? So those were the kind of situations, but with the help of APIs, the things have reduced. API is basically application programming interface we call it as, and that is usually the endpoint. So we can create an endpoint for any of this. So today, when Amazon developed its cloud services, it was clear that API is going to be a future. Now, if you check out about any service here, any service which is available on this platform, everything can be accessed with the help of command line interface as well, right? That is possible only because they have been able to open up the API for each and every service. So whenever you're going to hit a command in the command line, like let's say I want to create a S3 bucket, I'll just say AWS S3 and then the command for create bucket, and it's going to help me create it. So how is that actually possible? With the help of very few moments. That is because of the APIs. Now, one more good example of the APIs would be something like if you would have used like ClearTrip or Make My Trip. Yeah, so I'll tell you how APIs work. So if you have used something like ClearTrip, Make My Trip, Yatra, or any other website to just make a flight booking or a train booking, now it is really difficult for the airlines to expose the complete database for the users, whether it is Indigo, whether it is a SpiceJet, whether it is a Vistara, whether it is Air India or any other vendor. And what are these guys trying to do? They have got access behind the scene to the databases of all these airlines, Indigo, Go Air, SpiceJet, Air India, and everything. Now, whenever I say make a request from, let's say I want to fly from Bangalore to Delhi on so and so date, so it is going to hit the servers of all the companies, Indigo, Go Air, SpiceJet, and other things. So when I'm trying to hit a request, so they have opened up the database in the terms of APIs. So when we are going to do the RDS, you will see that we are going to connect to our database also using the API. That is, endpoint will be there, and to that endpoint I'll hit a request. And whenever I hit a request to that endpoint, I'll be able to easily retrieve the information back. So that is a practical usage on how we are going to put across. So that's the reason like websites like ClearTrip, Yatra, Make My Trip are able to easily fetch across the information from the various flight vendors, and they are able to show us what is the current status of the flight tickets availability. So in today's world, whatever we use, most of the websites are getting the data with the help of APIs. When we talk about the Book My Show to book the movie tickets, when we talk about the train ticket booking, or when we talk about the flight tickets booking, or even the bus tickets booking. So everything in this world works with the help of APIs, because things have become much more easier. So if I want point A to be able to communicate to point B securely without with limited set of access, so what I can actually set it up is API. So even when we are trying to communicate with our AWS console with the help of command line. It is all with the help of the APIs that we are trying to use. So that is where the people are saying this is the next big future that is going to come across. Just with the help of APIs and the Lambda functions, I can trigger it and render the web pages directly, right? So I don't have to worry about my EC2 instances, neither the auto scaling, neither the load balancer, nothing. Everything is taken care by this API and the Lambda functions. So how it is going to work now? As I just said, API endpoints are just given to this. Now every request that is going to come from the end user is going to be treated as a single Lambda function. So we are going to create multiple Lambda functions. So tomorrow, if I say there's a big billion day sale coming on my website, I don't have to worry about load balancing or auto scaling at all. All I need to worry is about the good Lambda function and the code that is being written behind it. So if there are 1 billion users who are going to access my website, then there are going to be 1 billion Lambda functions running behind the scene. I do not have to worry about where it is going to run, how it's going to run. Everything is taken care by Amazon. Amazon has got thousands or billions of servers which are free behind the scene on which this is going to run the Lambda function. And the cost of running a Lambda function is really cheaper. So if you're trying to run a Lambda function which requires 1 GB of memory, because as we all know, whenever I'm going to write one function, I would usually declare some variables, and those variables do require some memory, right? So if I say a function for adding two numbers, I'll declare two variables, integer a, integer b, and then I'll try to add a plus b and store it in the integer c, right? So I have declared three variables a, b, and c. So in order to have those variables store these numbers, I need some memory behind. So that is where our Lambda function also requires little memory. So if you are going to occupy a space of 1 GB, for every 1 second, if you are going to use it across, the Lambda function is going to be charged at 0.00001667. So it is very cheaper. And also it is going to check out for the amount of time that code is going to run across. So these are the parameters on which I'm going to check out how the Lambda is going to be priced. So let me put across. So on what basis I'm basically charged for? So the one will be the amount of duration my function executes. Second is amount of memory required for the execution of function. So these are the two parameters. So specifically, if I talk about one small request which can be completed in few seconds, let's say 5 seconds. So you can just multiply this specific number into 5 for 1 GB of memory if I have allocated, right? So that is how the Lambda pricing is being calculated. And talking about this architecture here, so as I just said, whenever the end user is going to hit the request, it is going to go and trigger my API, which in turn is going to trigger my Lambda function, and it's going to render the web page either from one of my EC2 instance or maybe from one of my S3 bucket directly here. So I can also use S3 for uploading the large files. So if you have the website which is going to render something like videos or the audio files, then you can straight away use S3, and you can use Auth0 for the authentication services, Firebase specifically for using as a streaming database where you can store all the transactions and other things, and Stripe for collecting the credit card payments. I'm not sure, but I'm just expecting that the Hotstar.com, which is currently available, is a part of which that runs on the serverless environment. Is just a buzz. I'm not sure about it. Maybe I'll have to check across because we don't have correct information. So if you have ever used hotstar.com, Hotstar is basically a service from the Star network, which helps you to view across all the tele episodes that have been coming across on all the different Star channels. So this is expected that this is a channel where I can actually check out all the TV episodes, all the movies. Some of them sports are rendered live at times, right? So all this is basically whenever I'm trying to hit hotstar.com, it is said that this is actually being rendered from a serverless environment. So the moment I'm going to go ahead and click on hotstar.com, it is actually going to trigger the API behind the scene, and that API is going to actually render this web page. Okay, the kind of languages that are supported in the Lambda at this point of time: Node.js, Java, Python, and C# has been recently added across. So there are 4 languages that my Lambda function supports. So it is a I would say like it is a very good thing for the developers to get started with. So if they really want to worry only about the code and nothing else, they can straight away use the Lambda functions, try to develop them in Node.js, Java, or Python, and then play around with the services in the AWS. And in terms of the pricing for the Lambda, the first 1 million requests are free. After that, I'll be charged for $0.20 for every 1 million requests. So that is very minimal charge we have got. And in terms of the duration and the amount of memory that is being allocated to each function, I'll be charged upon that as well. So why is Lambda really cool? We do not require any servers. The scaling happens automatically. So each request is considered to be a single and is being run by independent Lambda function, and they are really very, very cheap. So if you think you want to host a website like something like Hotstar, today Hotstar is very popular. Let's say if it is less popular, let's say you have created on some website like example.com, which is actually hosted on the which is hosted using the Lambda. And if I am going to host it on normal EC2 instances, yearly I have to pay around 6,000 INR for the hosting, right? So it's almost like 600 INR for every month the hosting charges are. So overall I can say for 1 year together it can be somewhere around 6,000. But if I'm going to use it with the Lambda, then I don't even have to pay the 6,000 at all. So the number of requests that are going to hit my server is only the amount I'm going to pay. So as we just saw that the 1 GB of function, if I execute it for 1 second, I'm going to pay $0.00001667. Right? If I'm going to use this, then hardly, if there are no people who are going to use my website, then hardly I'm going to get across $1 or $2 of charge for 1 complete year. So I straight away make a lot of savings by using a Lambda. So any questions or queries here? Yeah, sure. I'll try to accommodate one lab because even I have not explored much on this part. I'll try to do it by the end of our course. So I'll just give you a small example how the Lambda function works. How can we create it? Even we are experimenting on that, on creation of the APIs and then the creation of the Lambda functions. I'll surely give one small insight on how we can host a static web page on the S3 and then straight away deliver it from the Lambda. Okay, so just remember about the 2 different cases where I can use a Lambda. One is event driven purpose, second is compute driven purpose. Let's forget about the compute for a while. If we talk about the event driven, let's say in your server, okay, we'll talk about EC2 instance. Let's say your server wants to be switched on automatically and switched off automatically at some point of time. So how do you want to get this activity rounded up for your EC2 instance? So we can actually use something like Lambda. So in Lambda, I can say that this is the instance ID which needs to be stopped at 9 o'clock in the evening. Again, at the early morning 9 o'clock, you need to switch it on. So that will be already written in the Lambda function as a part of my code. And I'm going to trigger this Lambda function every day, right? So that is an event driven compute service. Similarly, I just gave you one more example. Let's say I'm using S3 bucket for storing the images. So I want to ensure that whenever a new image gets into my S3 bucket, I want to add that copyright mark. So it will be very difficult if I go down to S3 bucket every time to check if someone has really added a image or not. So what I'm trying to make use of, I'm trying to make use of Lambda. So the Lambda is going to automatically pick up whenever there is a new image, and it's going to process it using the code. I would have written the code maybe in the Java or maybe in the C sharp. I would have written the code, and it's going to pick up the image, it's going to process it, and then it is going to store back in the S3 itself. Right? So that is a function that is written in Lambda. Pick up the image, process it, store it back in the S3 bucket at so and so folder or so and so bucket, right? So those are the things that I can actually put across with the Lambda. So I can automate the things. So if you want to run some batch jobs, or if you want to do some activity, you can actually do with the Lambda very easily. So you don't have to worry about the operating system. You don't have to worry about in what language I have to write, right? So there are 4 languages supported, which are widely used across in all the software platforms. That is Python, Java, C Sharp, and the Node.js. So just write the function in this and just talk about how much memory you would like to allocate for this function to trigger, and then it will be done. So any other questions? Shiva, Rahul from your side? As I just said, even I'm experimenting on this. We have not done much on the Lambda yet because as a part of architect, I have not got much of exposure because as I said, this is completely a developer friendly service, which is helping the developers directly to build the functions and develop the serverless environments. But that is something that is going to be a future that is being expected to surge by the next couple of years. So even I have started exploring this part to learn about. So mostly by the end of our course, when we are about to do our project, before that we'll try to do one small Lambda function lab. Yeah, sure. I'll try my best to accommodate that part of the lab. Shiva, any doubts from your side? Okay, so with this, we have almost completed up our EC2 service apart from the ALB, which we are going to again look back once we complete our Route 53 section. So let's quickly review on what all we have learned as a part of our EC2. I'll just give a quick summary. Yeah, so as a part of our quick summary, let's see what all we have learned. So in the first part of our introduction point, no, I don't know about the interview questions about Lambda yet because I need to check through. Okay, so as a quick point review of what we learned in EC2. So these are all the sections that we learned. Trust me, EC2 is one of the longest section in the complete AWS course because it is the backbone on which the complete environment runs, right? So EC2 is something that is really important to be known. So in the first part of our class, we learned about what is introduction to the EC2, what we call, why we call it as EC2. So EC2 is short form for Elastic Cloud Compute, and it is basically a place where I can launch my virtual machines, whether it is a Linux box or whether it is a Windows box. And then we learned about what are different types of EC2 options, that is on-demand instances, reserved instances, and then spot instances. And then we looked ahead at what are the different families of the EC2 instance. So in terms, if you remember that acronym DIRT MCGFPX, the Dirty Melbourne Cricket Ground, right? So that is how we can remember the different types of families that are actually available in the EC2. So what is a family? Family basically defines the amount of CPU and the RAM that is being assigned for each virtual machine. So depending upon the different computing needs, we use different machines. And then we learned about the EBS. That is where we introduced our block-based storage. In the EBS, we have two different types: SSD, that is solid state drive, and HDD, that is magnetic hard disk drive. So there are two different types, that is SSD and the magnetic HDD. In SSD, again, I have two types, that is GP2, general purpose, IO1, provisioned IOPS. In magnetic, I have three types: magnetic standard, SC1, that is cold hard disk drive, HD1, that is throughput hard disk drive. So these are the different types of EBS volumes. Once we learned about a little introduction, then we went ahead to launch our first virtual machine in both the sides, in Linux as well as in the Windows, and we saw how to log in inside those instances as well. After that, we learned in detail about what is a security group, how are these security groups helpful to secure the environment of my virtual machines, and whatever rules that I'm going to apply to this security group, how fast are they going to take effect. So we learned about all the important parts in the security groups. Then we learned about what is Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is basically a script that runs while the system is launched for the very first time. So if I want to run certain configuration commands or certain softwares to be pre-installed while the system is booting up for the very first time, I can put it across in the Bootstrap and I'll be able to make use of it. And then we learned about AMI, that is Amazon Machine Image. So if you want to create your own image so that it is always ready for usage, so what did we do? We specifically spinned up one virtual machine, tried to execute all the commands, did the required configuration, did the required installation of the softwares and the patches, and then straight away we created an AMI so that next time I don't have to do all the manual activity. Everything is ready in the form of machine image. Pick up that machine image and pick up that machine image and we will be able to easily spin up the environment that is the kind of required for us. Next, we learned about the volumes and the snapshots. So we learned how the volumes can be attached to the EC2 instances, how the snapshots are like backup for these volumes. So to secure our data and in order to help from the disaster recovery, we use the snapshots, that is taking the backup of the existing volumes, and we take the snapshot of the existing volumes and then we will be able to recover it back in case I want to get out from the disaster. Then we learned about instance metadata. Instance metadata is basically the URL, if you remember, 169.254.169.254/latest/meta-data. Remember, this is a URL in order to fetch the data about the EC2 instance when you are already inside it. So if you want to find out what is the instance ID, if you want to find out what is a public IP address, if you want to find out what is a public DNS name, all those parameters can be easily found out using this instance metadata. Next, we learned about the placement groups. So placement groups are basically virtual way of grouping the EC2 instances in order to achieve high network bandwidth and the low latency. Yeah, so in order to achieve the low latency and high network throughput, we basically go ahead and combine virtually all the EC2 machines, but there are certain rules that are needed to be followed while we are going to put them into placement groups. So if you remember a couple of them, all the EC2 instances must be from the same availability zone. They should be of homogeneous type, which means they should be of same family, same type, and you will not be able to club the existing placement groups. So those are certain rules that we had to follow when we create a placement group. And next is the IAM user and the role with the EC2 instance. So we looked across how can we help our EC2 instance securely communicate with our S3 buckets. So if it wants to communicate with the S3 bucket, the best way is to use the roles. However, we have also explored the option of user, where we are trying to store the access key ID and the secret access key, which at times can be a difficult option, because if my credentials get compromised, then someone is actually going to get access to my S3 buckets. So users and the roles are the way in which we can establish the connection with S3 bucket for the EC2 instances, but the roles are the more secured when compared to user. And later we also looked at the command line interface, how we communicate with our S3 buckets from our command line or EC2 instance itself, and how can we copy the data from one point to other, or how we can synchronize the data as well. And then we looked at EBS versus instance store. So what is the EBS volume? What is the instance store volume? So EBS is a volume which is actually called as persistent volumes. In other words, instance store volumes are other way called as ephemeral volumes. So whatever data I'm going to store on instance store, if my instance is not working properly, I'm going to lose everything, because instance store volumes, as you know, we do not even know what is the size, what is the type, where it is existing. No information is being displayed across. But EBS, I'll be able to know that the size of my volume is at least 8 GB or 10 GB, and it is of type SSD drive. So I'll be able to easily pick up and say, okay, this is going to have so much of speed in order to store the data, right? So all those things at least we can define in EBS, but in terms of instance store volumes, we do not have any control over it. And then we learned about the RAID volumes. So the RAID volumes is basically trying to combine the existing volumes so that I get a better network output. So I'll be trying to use the input output per second, that is IOPS of each of these volumes. So together when combined, I get more IOPS, and then I'm trying to make the system work more faster and more efficient using the RAID volumes. And remember, RAID 5 is never recommended by Amazon to be used across. We can use either RAID 0, RAID 1 or RAID 10. And then we learned to learn the usage of EFS. So if you have a hard disk drive that needs to get connected to the two computers or two servers at the same time, how do we do it? It's practically not possible. But yes, there is some features like EFS, which actually helps in to connect not one, not two, but tens, hundreds, and thousands of EC2 instances to the same file system. Yeah, we don't use RAID 5 because RAID 5 works on a parity check formula. So whenever I'm going to store something or whenever I'm going to retrieve back something, it basically tries to do some mathematical formula calculations to retrieve the data or store the data. So if my sectors are going bad, and if it is trying to calculate with the help of formula, and if that sector is not available now, let's say due to bad sectors, it is not able to access it, right? So there will be a lot of problems with the RAID 5. So for storing, for reading the data, RAID 5 is good, but for storing the data, it's not good. So sometimes it does happen that the parity check formula rewrites the data which is already written on the available sectors. So my data gets overwritten. So RAID 5 has got problems writing a lot of data. So if two users are currently using it, right? So the mathematical calculation formula for both of them might get same, and then the data gets merged into one. So one of them will lose the files in that case. So RAID files are specifically not used in that way. And next we learned about the load balancers. So load balancers are the place where we can actually have our persistent web servers, I will say, so that even if one of the instance behind the scene goes down, I still have my other one helping me to render the content, because the load balancer is actually balancing the complete load behind the scene. And then we learned about auto scaling, which is going to ensure that my system is going to be highly available, right? So in case the load is going to increase, automatically the auto scaling is going to add the certain number of instances for me. If the load is decreasing, automatically it's going to pick it out. So it is going to scale up and scale down as per the need of the hour. And then we learned about CloudWatch. So what all can we do with the CloudWatch? So in the metrics that we usually get in the EC2 section or the S3 section or any other AWS service, we can actually send them all across to the CloudWatch, where we will be able to monitor at one single screen. Just apart from monitoring, which is available in CloudWatch, we have other things like events and the logs. So if you want to go ahead and start writing the logs for your instances or your S3 buckets or any other services, you can make use of those log groups. Or in case if you want to trigger some automatic events which are pre-built in the CloudWatch, you can make use of that. Some of the examples are like, you want to take a backup of your volumes every day at a specific scheduled time, you can actually put across that as an event in the CloudWatch, and that will do the work for you. And just now we learned about Lambda, that is function as a service. So Lambda is evolving as the new service over the time, and this is something they are expecting it, which is going to be the future ahead. So any questions on this part? Rahul, as I said, you have a couple of questions. Okay, how do we monitor memory in the cloud? Yeah, so we have a Perl script that we can actually put across in our Linux-based machines, which is actually going to help us create our own custom metrics. So I'll show the part of that lab for the memory on how do we configure it in next class. So I just need to prepare the steps for that. It's been a little while, I don't have any steps for that monitoring part of memory. So I'll prepare the steps and get it through. So we have a Perl script which is ready. We don't have to do much things, just we need to know how to configure it, and it's going to start sending the memory as a one of the metrics to the CloudWatch. Okay, role given through EC2. I didn't get the last point. Through policy, because policies are basically attached to the role, and that role is assigned to the EC2. So we cannot directly assign the policy to the EC2. We can only attach either a role or a user.
Hi, Pawan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a doubt. Means if suppose if we are giving to the access to the EC2 through the policy, and if we are giving access to the EC2 through the IAM role, so what is different between on them? Means what exactly we are because all the access through we can give the access to the IAM role also and through the policy, right? But what is the mainly difference between of them?
So you're talking about the IAM user and the IAM role or the policy? Because see, when we talk about the IAM section, we have users, we have roles,
Hmm.
we have groups. Okay. And the policies
Okay.
are nothing but the permissions. Okay. These permissions or the policies can be attached to all three of them. Whether I want to attach a policy to the user, I'll be able to attach it. If I want to attach a policy to the role, I'll be able to attach it. If I want a policy to be attached to the group, I can attach it, because policy is nothing but a permission document. So if I create a group, I need to tell what permissions this group has, like only the S3 buckets, or only the EC2 section, or only the database section. Right. So that is a kind of policy I can build, and I can attach it to any one of them, either a user or a role or a group. Now, if we are talking about using the IAM user with the EC2 instance and the role with the EC2 instance, as I just showed you, if I'm trying to use the user, I need to have the access key and the secret access key. Right. So if someone,
Right.
let's say we all are administrators, you, me, Shiva are working in the same company, and we all are administrators. And there is also one other newly joined person in our company. So now it's our own company, so we have a good understanding between us on what to do, what not to do, but we didn't know how to use the roles, and we initially started using the IAM user and attach it to the EC2 instance. Some third party user joined our company, and he finds out that there's a lot of data this company has. Maybe he can make use it for his own setup, right? So if we are trying to use IAM user, and if he also has got access to our EC2 instances, since he has joined our company, we trusted him and we gave him some EC2 instances, IP addresses, and the ID passwords. So he was able to log in into the EC2 instance, but we have not actually given him any access towards the S3. We just asked him to work in the Linux environment to build some Java application, or maybe build some PHP application. But he, being little intelligent, what he does, he finds out that there are some credentials already stored inside this EC2 instance. So if you remember, we were able to check out by going to the directory with the name tilde. So if I say change directory to tilde, and then if I open out all the hidden files which are available, so from there he can easily get the credentials. So if I'm going to use the role, I'm not storing any credentials in my EC2 machine. So if I'm using a user, I'm storing the credentials inside my machine, and then I'm able to establish a connection with the S3 bucket. But if I'm using the role, in the role, what happens is automatically the access key and secret access key exist, but they exist somewhere else, and that keeps changing every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? So that is, we call it as STS, behind the scene, secure token service, we call it as. So the tokens keep changing behind the scene every 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So even if the user is going to get hold of those credentials, he'll not be able to do anything with it, because some of them would have been expired, or they keep changing with the time.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Pawan.
Any questions from your side, Shiva? Okay, so we are quickly going to navigate to our new section of service, that is about Route 53. So this is really an interesting section where we are going to learn how to host your user-friendly domains. Now that we know in the EC2 section how to create our web servers, but they just had either an IP address or the load balancer endpoint. But I'm not going to share that endpoint with the my friends or colleagues, right? So if I have to go ahead and launch a website like flipkart.com, so I would be proud enough to say that this is my website, you may want to visit it, right? So how do we configure our user-friendly websites? So this is a place called as Route 53 where we are going to go ahead and host our user-friendly domain names. So before we can start the lab portion directly on Route 53, I'll quickly give you introduction on what are the important things as a part of Route 53. So quickly navigating across our slide to learn about the introduction. So what is DNS? DNS basically stands for domain name system. Now, if you have used internet, you have actually used what is called as DNS. Now, the most easiest example to understand the DNS is our phone directory. Now, if you have to remember my name, that would be easier for you. But if you have to remember me with the phone number, that is difficult. Now, everyone has got a phone number or a mobile number with them. So if you have to remember their mobile number, it will be very difficult for each of us, because I might have got hundreds of friends or more than that, and storing out and trying to remember each of these phone numbers is really difficult. If I have to call them, I need to remember their phone numbers in that case. So what have we done? We have created a phone book inside which I can store the phone number of any person with a user-friendly name. So I'll store it as, let's say, Rahul, and then I'll just put it across the name. I'll store it as Shiva, and then I'll try to put across the phone number and save it. So tomorrow, whenever I feel like I would like to give a call to you, I'll simply go down to my phone book. I'll just type Rahul, and then I'll be able to get the name, and when I click on it, it will automatically go ahead and dial in. Similarly is the DNS. So each website like Amazon, Flipkart, Paytm, Cleartrip, Make My Trip, Yatra, if you talk about any website that we are using, right, every one of them has got specific servers IP address behind it, right? Either it is a load balancers DNS endpoint, or whether it is a IP address from wherever it is being rendered. Now it is really difficult if I have to remember the IP address of all these URLs, Flipkart, Amazon, or anything else, right? So what have we done? So we have created a system called as DNS, which works exactly like a phone book. So you cannot have duplicate entries. You can have only one single entry for each of the domain. So if Flipkart is already being owned by someone else, I cannot go ahead and purchase the same domain anymore. It is only once that a domain is available and you can purchase it. So we are purchasing the domains like example.com, and it actually has got IP address behind it as 82.124.53.1. This is just an example here. So what happens whenever I'm going to hit any URL, it actually tries to contact the IP address behind it, and then from there it is actually trying to render the web page for me. So IP addresses are used by the computers to identify each other on the network. IP addresses commonly come in two different forms, that is IPv4 and the IPv6. So there are two different ways in which we'll be able to look through at what is DNS. So IPv4 have been in use for a very long time until now, but now there's a lot of users who are trying to use internet, so the IPv4 addresses are not enough anymore. So I'm sure you guys would have all looked at what is IPv4. It's something like this: 82.124.53.1, right? So we just have 32-bit field, and this was introduced somewhere in 1985, I guess, when the internet was started. And at that time, this IPv4 was very much enough because there were not many people who used the internet, and they never thought that so many people would start using the internet by the end of few decades. So it's been almost 2 decades, more than that, 1985, 95, 2000. Yeah, it's almost 3 decades, and then we have been still using the IPv4. So IPv4 really survived a long era of 30 years, and now in order to solve the depletion issue, they have created IPv6, because IPv4 has got only these many number of IP addresses that can be generated. Now we all know everyone is using a smartwatch, someone is using a mobile device, someone is using computers, someone having laptop, tabs. So we have got a lot of devices. Now each of these devices, if they get connected to internet, every one of them needs to have a IP address, right? So this IPv4 is no more sufficient to help cater the needs of all the people across the world. So that is when IPv6 has been created to solve the depletion issue. Now with the IPv6, we actually have 128 bit. So in this, I'm going to get so many IP addresses. That is nothing but 340 undecillion addresses I'm going to get across. So I hope this also serves for at least next 15-20 years or maybe more than that, helping the people to generate so many different IP addresses. So if I help you to show the IP address of my machine at this point of time, I have opened up the command prompt. I'll just say IP config. You see it is showing me the IPv6 address which is available for my machine, right? So here is the IPv6 address 2001, there is :0:9D38:90D7, something as such, right? So this is the IPv6 address of the vendor from where I am getting this internet address, and this is how we can securely identify my machine from the network. Most of the internet service providers have shifted to IPv6. Maybe you guys can also check out your IP address by going to the command prompt and check out IP config. Maybe you might also see the IPv6 on your machines. Next is the top level domains. Now who actually creates these domains and who helps us to sell it? So there are certain companies who decide first what is a top level domain, right? So we do see there are websites with the name flipkart.com, paytm.com, mobiquick.com, or any other, right? cleartrip.com, makemytrip.com. So all of them actually come under .com. So some company which is actually called as IANA, that is Internet Assigned Authority Numbers, Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. So this is a company who is actually maintaining all these top level domains. So it goes ahead and declares that the .com is a domain which is going to be used worldwide, and people will start purchasing the domains under this. So people started purchasing something like flipkart.com, paytm.com, makemytrip.com, yatra.com. So first company declares what is going to be my top level domains, and if the top level domain is available, then we can straight away go ahead and purchase the user friendly domains under that section. Similarly, we also have something called as second level domain. Now you would have also seen some websites with the name .co.uk or .co.in or .gov.in or .gov.uk, right? So in this case, .co is first level domain, .uk is second level domain. So these top level domains are specifically controlled by IANA, that is Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, and that is actually stored in this root database. So if you go and click on this link, you will be able to see what are the top level domains currently available. So sometimes they keep announcing the new domains. As such, a couple of years back they announced .cloud as a new domain. So Azure.cloud, AWS.cloud, if you go ahead and actually hit across, automatically they'll be redirected towards the original website itself. If you see here, Azure.cloud, you see automatically it is redirected to azure.microsoft.com. So they have actually purchased the domain of .cloud in the name of Azure, and it is redirecting it to the azure.microsoft.com. Similarly, I'm not sure if AWS has purchased it. It should have done it. I'm not sure about it. AWS.cloud, yeah, it goes down automatically to aws.amazon.com, right? So there was a recent announcement, I guess recent means not that recent, it's been one or 2 years. They have actually come up with this .cloud as a domain, and people were able to purchase across the user-friendly names. So you can purchase something like flipkart.cloud, which might be still available, but flipkart.com is not available anymore. So everything is actually controlled by this IANA. So it decides what are the top level domains which are going to be which are to be used by the people. So once the top level domains are announced, there are some domain registrars. Okay, so if you have heard about GoDaddy, BigRock, 123reco.uk, Namespace, Bluehost, they are all basically the domain registrars. See, so these domain registrars work in close with IAN organizations. So once the top level domain like .com is announced, so the domain registrars are going to help us to purchase the user-friendly domains. So what happens, because all of the names in a given domain have to be unique, there needs to be a way to organize so that the domain names aren't duplicated. This is where the domain registrars come in. So the domain registrars are going to ensure that the domain, if once purchased, it cannot be purchased from anywhere else. So a registrar is an authority that can assign domain names directly under one or more top level domains. So these domains are registered with Internic, a service of ICANN, which enforces the uniqueness of the domain names. So Internic, which is a service of ICANN, actually enforces the uniqueness of domain. So when I talk about Flipkart.com, the Internic actually checks and says that, okay, this domain is already occupied, you cannot buy it anymore. Similarly, if I go ahead and check out for Paytm.com, it says this is also occupied. So whenever I go to GoDaddy.com and try to find out the user-friendly domains which are still available, so it is actually checking out in the database of Internic where all the domains are registered, and it says, okay, this user-friendly domain name has been occupied or not. Each domain name becomes registered in a central database known as Whois database. So let's see out one small example. Let's check out for Flipkart.com. Let's see what is the result we are going to get across. So here it says it is already registered and is also giving me information from where was this domain purchased, on what date this was purchased, and when is the domain going to expire, and who has actually purchased it. Right, so it gives me a complete information here. So it is with the name Flipkart.com. It was purchased from the GoDaddy.com on the date of 3rd June 2007, and currently the expiry date is 3rd June 2022. So they have actually purchased the domains for almost 15 years plus, and here it says clearly that client delete prohibited. If you see here the ICANN service, so some of the services actually are related directly to the ICANN, where it says the renewal is prohibited, right? So the transfer is also prohibited. No one can go ahead and purchase this or renew this apart from the Flipkart directly. Similarly, let's check out for any other website if you want to. I'll just go down. I'll just say Cleartrip. So this was purchased by Cleartrip company on 19th of January 2005, and it was registered from whois.networksolutions.com. So this is the person who has sold this domain to them, and currently the expiry date stands at 19th of January on 2019. So these are the different things that we can basically look out from the Whois database. So I also get the hold of name servers and the status of the domains, whether it is transferred, whether it is transferable or not, right? So currently it says client transfer prohibition, so it cannot be transferred or it cannot be renewed by anyone else. Yeah, if you are not sure whether this is correct or not, you can just first click on Google Whois. So there are a couple of websites, the Whois. So one is whois.com. second is whois.net, or you can directly use the ICANN whois, right? So ICANN is the one who is actually giving the top level domains, and he also has got the whois database. So if you are not sure whether the information given by the first one is correct or not, you can straight away go down to the second one to check out here. I'll just say cleartrip.com. I'll also put it across in the third one. Whois.net is perfectly fine to check directly the information, or you can go for the ICANN whois. Is also going to give you all the important information, who has registered it, on whose name it is. It also gives you more information about it. So if you see, it gives me the registration contact. Hrish Bhatt was the name of the person who made registration, and he has given that the admin of this Cleartrip organization is Sanjeev Sridharan. So he has given a lot of information here. I can also get the phone number and also the office from where the registration has been made across for. Right. So this one gives me much more detailed information. ICANN gives me much more detailed information. So it's always better we can directly go to the ICANN whois and get the complete information about the websites. Now, before we can move ahead, there are certain important things that we need to learn about in the Route 53. So in Route 53, we have got different type of records. So one of them is SOA, that is start of authority record. Now the start of authority record is nothing but simply like this information, like from whom it was purchased, what is the, so it gives us the name of the server that supplied the data for the zone. So from where it was purchased, who is the administrator, what is the current version of data file, and other things, right? So the start of authority record is something like this, where I can go ahead and update all the information. Who is the registrar? What are my name servers? Who is like when was it created? When is going to expire? And other things. I can actually go ahead and update this information on start of authority records, and it will start displaying the information to my end users. And then we have NS records. NS records are otherwise called as name server records, and the name server records are actually used by the top level domain servers to direct the traffic to the content DNS servers, which contains the authoritative DNS records. Now, to understand it very simple and easily, I'll just give you one small example. We have got a lot of post offices across the India, right? So wherever location we are staying, in that specific area, we have got a specific post office department. Now, if you want to write a post to, let's say, to one of your relatives or grandmothers or grandfathers, earlier days, what we used to do, we buy the postcard and then we write the content, and then we are going to put it in my nearest post office, right? So here it is the same. Name server records are nothing but it is just like a post office. So if you see in ICANN whois, there are 4 different kinds of name servers we have. So whenever I'm going to actually hit flipkart.com or cleartrip.com, it is actually going to first hit down to this name servers. So these name servers have got the exact address where the cleartrip.com is being hosted, which means, so if I'm going to send a post to my friend or colleague or my grandparents, I first need to go to post office to put it across, right? So this is like a post office. So in this, whichever is the nearest one, automatically my request will be routed to that nearest name server, and that name server has got an exact location where this needs to be delivered, right? So if I go down and give my post, they really know where this post has to be sent across, right? So they have exact information. So similar is the case here. So whenever the request comes from the outside world, it is going to check for the name servers, that is the like the nearest post office to it, and from there it is going to find out the exact and appropriate address where the user has to be redirected to. So the name servers are the place where the traffic actually comes in from the top level domains, and these actually directed to the exact DNS name, whether it is a load balancer or it is an EC2 instance, it can directly send across. And then we have a record. A record is like a address record. So in this actually I store my address. So if my website name is example.com, then and the address is like 123.10.10.80. So in this, excuse. So in this specific A record, I am going to store my address. So this is A record is like a postcard. So this postcard I am going to, this is a postcard on which I'm going to also write the address. A stands for address, so that is why it's called as A record. So let me put across in the notepad what are the important things that we learned just now. So first is SOA, that is start of authority. And then we learned about NS, that is name servers. And then we just learned about A, that is address. So these are the three records that we currently learned about. And the next one is TTL. Now TTL is basically time to live. Now how much time a specific website's address is going to live in my system. So if you have used your mobile phones very well, you know that let's say you get a phone from unknown number for a while. The moment you get a phone from the unknown number, that specific number will be stored in the memory of my mobile phones for a little while, maybe 1 or 2, 3 days. How I'll tell you. So the moment you get a phone, you talk to him and then you disconnect it. Later sometime when you again go back to your phone and click on call button, and then you start entering the number. If you just remember the 4 digits of the number from where you received the call sometime back, just try to enter the 4 digits and you will be able to see that that number is still appearing on your screen back, right? So it will show you in the suggestions that there is a complete phone number which starts with 9867 something as such, right? So that is how similarly the way whenever I'm going to open any website in my system, it is going to get cached, right? So if I would have opened up Flipkart yesterday, now if I again go back and open it, it will load much faster because it has already been cached on my system. You see, it just took fraction of seconds to load the page. It was because it already knows that I have visited this page and this is already, all the content is already cached onto my system. So it knows where is the address of Flipkart. It doesn't need to wait for the response to get from the server. It already knows the address from where it is getting delivered. So all the things are already stored in my computer with the help of TTL. So whenever we are going to create any website, we can also define TTL, that is the amount of time that has to be in the cache of a specific system or a mobile device or anywhere else. So if I define the TTL as 86,400 seconds, which means if the person is trying to open the same website in next 24 hours, it is going to work much faster for him. So usually the TTL is kept at 5 days, so that if person is again trying to visit the same website in 5 days, they don't have to wait for the server to respond. So the things will work faster for them because they have already visited few of the pages. And then we have CNAMEs. CNAME is basically a canonical name, we call it as. Now what is canonical name? So if you have used website in the mobile, website on the tablets, website on your computer devices, you can see that the URL sometimes will change. So if I try to open the same Flipkart in the mobile, it might come something like this, m.flipkart.com, or if you open something like Snapdeal, it will become m.snapdeal.com. Sometimes it also becomes something like this, m.cleartrip.com. So this is one other website, but actually behind the scene it is the same, just that I'm using the mobile dashboard. The website has become m.cleartrip.com. Similarly for Facebook, I'm not sure if you guys would have tried it. Just try with fb.com. It will automatically redirect to the Facebook itself. Let me show you here. I'll just say fb.com. You see, it is redirecting automatically to the Facebook itself. Right? So this secondary name, what we have, fb.com or m.cleartrip.com, these are nothing but the canonical names. So just put it as here, CNAME. CNAME basically stands for canonical. So these are the different type of records which we really need to remember from the Route 53 perspective. That is SOA, that is start of authority, NS, that stands for name records, A, that stands for address record, and CNAME, that stands for canonical names. Now before we can go ahead and start the lab, there's one more important thing that I would just like to introduce it to, and we'll close the session for the day, and we'll again continue back the lab portion tomorrow. So but before we close, one small important portion as a part of Route 53, that is alias records. So alias records are actually introduced by Amazon itself internally to work with the Route 53. So if I want to map my domain like flipkart.com with a load balancer, I'll be basically using the alias records. So for now, don't get confused with the CNAME and the alias. I'm going to practically show you how we are going to deal with it. But just remember, alias is a concept that is only under the Amazon cloud. Rest of the things that we learned across with the CNAME, A, NS, and SOA are basically global terms related to the Route 53. Any questions before we close for the day? How about you, Rahul? Any questions from your side? What is PTR? Okay, I'm not sure about it, so I just ask. Okay. Okay. Sure, no worries. We are going to discuss few more things about the Route 53 tomorrow, and we are going to do a practical lab to see how we can convert our virtual machines into user-friendly domains to be accessible from the end users. Thanks all. Have a great day, and we'll meet back tomorrow again at the same time in the morning.